welcome to another episode of Tiny Nest. I'm Kiva.
And I'm Jake. This series is following our tiny house project from the early stages through to completion and beyond.
This is part 2 of our flooring installation.
So now that we're at our first corner of the shower room here, the seam is landing quite close to the wall here, which was intentional. And so first of all, for this row, to minimize wastage, maximize the use of the boards, we've got 2 full-length boards up to where they need to be at the end with an allowance for a gap. So these are just sitting in place like this as a point of reference for this piece. So this is the piece that's going to span across here. And so what I've done is basically just butt it up against here so I know where it needs to be, and then made a mark here and back here. That will be the width of the notch that I'm going to cut out of it. Then I took a little scrap, laid it in like this. This is very similar to what we did on our siding. Used a scrap, held it right up against an obstacle, and then I made a mark here, and then I can transfer this amount to this board, so now I know the depth and the width of what I need to cut out so that it will fit around this room. And then this will, as you'll see, help us line up this other section in the kitchen. To cut these, even though all the cuts should be hidden by trim, to avoid blowing out some massive chunk that we can't hide, I've got a sort of method here which involves extending the saw pretty much as far as it can go, which increases the angle that the teeth are going up. And so when I'm cutting like this, I have the pieces face down. If they were face up, the teeth would be pulling upwards and could chip bits out. So I have it down so that the teeth are pulling into the nice face. So any blowout that would happen would be on the back. And I put this paper down so that I can clamp these down without worrying about like scratching the nice face. Here's the piece that's going to go around the shower room. So I made the marks when I was holding it right up against the room, so that I just transfer them to the back side and then use the scrap that I used to get the depth and transfer the marks from here by holding this against it and marking it on both ends, and then just holding a level to go from the 2 marks to make a straight shot. So now I'm going to use the circular saw to get most of that cut out, and then I'll see where I'm at and possibly use the jigsaw to get the corners finished. Should wear a mask. So this piece that we notched to go around the shower room is going to act as kind of a reference here for how to set up these rows so that it will meet up with it. And so we just grabbed some random pieces and thrown them down to kind of help lock it in and line it up. And that way it can't wiggle as much because there was a bit of play when it was just sitting here on its own. And then that also makes sure that we've got a straight line all the way down from that end to this end. So you can see we've thrown down some scraps here to see what's going to happen when we get to the edge. And this is quite thin, but I did know that it was going to be. It's not a surprise or anything. And the reason that it should be okay is that even though I've measured it to be like just under 2 centimeters of actual flooring showing, because it's going to be the edge that has the under lip here, the actual thickness of the piece that we drop down will be, more. It'll have this sticking out underneath. So it will be big enough to work with, I think. And we'll basically just kind of hook it on to the next row, make it kind of one piece, get that in place, and then we can work these rows that are represented by these to meet up with this. And then once we've got that lined up, then we've got a straight shot across the whole house. So a trick we've learned for measuring is that, say we want to use part of this piece to fill in here. So it's the natural thing is to think, oh well, we need this much, but if we mark it here and cut it, then we'll end up with the wrong end, because we actually need this end to interlock in here. And I made that mistake once, and I'm not going to make it again. So the trick is we can just flip it over, hold it up over here to basically where it needs to go, and then make a mark like this. And then when we cut it there, basically we just turn it around, and then from where we cut to here is this amount. Now that we have spanned across the shower room here, we just want to make sure that it's straight before we move on and start adding new rows, because if it's got a bit of a curve to it, we'll be fighting every piece of flooring that we put in from now on. So just looking down from the far end here, I can sort of see that it looks like it does a bit of a curve in, and that would make sense because, you know, this thin single piece of flooring could flex a little bit, and so it's flexed in, and the whole flooring section in front of what's going to be the cabinets in the kitchen there is just a little bit too far in. So we just need to shim it out a little bit and check again to make sure that this edge is straight all the way from that side to this side, and then we can start putting in the rest of these rows here, and then we know that, you know, it's square all the way across the house. So we've gotten this far with the flooring, and we were sort of having an issue here where we couldn't quite get it to line up perfectly. There was like a tiny hair of a seam, and we're trying to figure out what it was that was not fitting. And we have been noticing that, like, if you look from above, the bottom left corners of all these pieces, or a lot of them anyway, ended up kind of sitting a little bit high. Like, you can feel that there's a bit of a high point there. And we just thought that the subsequent pieces would kind of line things up, but we're starting to realize that it may not actually be clicking together the way it's supposed to. And we went back and looked at some of the stuff we did on the first part in the TV room, and there was definitely a couple spots that we could see were a little bit like flexed. So clearly they're not fitting 100% the way they should. So since we're not that far and it's super easy to just lift these pieces out, we're actually gonna go back. We're just gonna pull them all out, because they're all pre-cut. To put them back in is gonna be pretty easy. But we are gonna basically disassemble this whole thing and then go back over it and try to be a bit more careful with each piece to make sure that the corners, like especially in where the seam makes a T, is all flat and that is tight and everything. The other thing is that now that we can sort of see underneath where we've cut the cork out, it's clear that the pieces are kind of spanning a bit of they're kind of like a bridge, like over a void, and the intention was not really to make a void under there, it was just to reduce the height of this spot here that seemed high on the plywood. So it's a bit, we're not really sure, like, over time if maybe the wood will sag and we'll end up with this weird dip there, or if it could possibly break, or like if we jumped down off a ladder or something, or if it'll start creaking because there's, you know, somewhere for the wood to move. So anyway, because we're going to be pulling all this up anyway, we might put just a little bit of sill gasket or something thinner than the cork, which that was the whole point, was to make this spot lower, basically. So we're going to look into this and maybe do something a bit different.
Greetings, time traveler, and welcome to the future. I was editing this video and realized that we never explained what we ended up doing with that gap that we created to counteract that high spot. And the short answer is nothing. We didn't end up putting anything other than just that masking tape you saw. We tried putting sill gasket down, but it actually created even more of a high spot. It didn't squish down as much as we were hoping. The idea there was to fill the cavity so there was no actual open space underneath the flooring, but still have something squishy enough that it could compress down low enough that it would counteract that high spot. But that wasn't the case, so we just left it as it was, and we kept an eye on it to see if there was any sagging or if anything was noticeably adversely affected by leaving that space. But we're 8 months in the future now, and there's nothing noticeable. I think it's right around here, no creaking, and just no problems at all. So that's it for that, and I'll send you back to the pass.
So we've identified part of the reason why some of the corners are higher than the one right beside it. So ideally, when we fit it in along the edge and drop it down, it should just flatten right down. But it doesn't seem to want to go all the way down. It's kind of, there's resistance, and when you are not touching it, it's clearly higher. And we can see that the mechanism that's built into these boards with the tongue and groove is not lining up as it should. And it's either because the top part of the board, the top layer, has expanded, or this sort of particle material that has these grooves has contracted or something. Or maybe it's from different packs, one of the packs was open, so the pieces may have changed shape with moisture and heat because they have been in storage for a long time. So anyway, it doesn't line up properly, but luckily, because it's just this particle material that can be sanded off easily, we figured out what edge it is that's sort of catching, and we're just sanding off a tiny bit of material so that it can drop all the way without interfering, and we're getting a lot better results. And then additionally, one other thing we're doing is, I showed in my original demonstration of how we were doing it that I would basically butt it up, have this piece basically knock into this one before dropping it down, but that was causing this piece in some cases to come down a bit over top of the previous one and not line up and butt against it. So that was the second thing that was contributing to this problem. So we actually come away just a hair, leave a hair gap here after we sanded it a little bit, drop it down, and then tap it in until these close that gap. So that way there's no reason for it to sit any higher than the other side.
So this seam has landed a little bit further this way than we expected, but it's still within the span of the wall, which is what we were aiming for. And so that means that, as you can see, this piece has a notch to fit around the wall, and then the next piece has a similar notch to fit around the other side of the wall. And that made those two pieces easy to cut and to fit, but you can imagine that, say the seam landed just past, it was just before and just past the wall, so a piece would have to be like this. Then we would have had to cut this kind of U-shaped channel out of it, and then as we fit the piece into place, we'd have to basically get it in, get that channel around the wall, and then fit it into the next seam, and it would have been much more cumbersome to work with. So we lined this up like that on purpose, and in multiple spots, like when it's going to hit the fender and when it hits the final wall and everything, we've made sure that there's it's going to be a big enough piece to work with, and that, you know, there's no crazy notching that's going to make our life difficult, basically.
We finished our floor! Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like what we're doing here, and turn on email notifications so you never miss a video. You can also find extra resources in the description below.
We spend countless hours making these videos for YouTube. So if you appreciate our work, take 3 minutes to watch the video in the top left tile to learn some ways that you can support us for free.
We'd really appreciate it.